We'll get right to it. Megan Klein, Associate Attorney of Earthjustice. Megan, could you please step down? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Megan Klein from Earthjustice, and we very much support all efforts to ensure that New York takes all precautions against the potential dangers caused by hydraulic fracturing. Hydraulic fracturing is a method of gas extraction invented by Halliburton in the 1940s that has never been properly evaluated for its impacts on public health or the environment. We applaud EPA's efforts to finally evaluate properly the extent of the dangers posed by this practice that have already caused massive damage in other states such as Pennsylvania. Just last week in northwestern Pennsylvania, a drilling company lost control of a well that ruptured and caused wastewater laden with chemicals to shoot 75 feet into the air and continue to pollute the environment for 16 hours straight. It is crucial that New York consider EPA's report and the information gleaned from that report and take all possible precautions to prevent the advent of hydraulic fracturing in New York from destroying our drinking water supplies and threatening public health.
Martha Robertson, who is chair of the Tompkins County Legislature.
Thank you, Karl. I drove down here from Tompkins County. Most people know where Cornell is. That's sort of pretty much near the sweet spot. And I just want to say it's actually nothing short of amazing that we're here today on the verge of, with the Engelbright-Addabbo bill, on the verge of New York State telling the industry, we got to wait until the science is done. We got to wait until the EPA study is done. Nothing short of amazing, considering the millions of dollars the industry has poured into lobbying and advertisements and free buses for all those people who are in Albany on Wednesday. But we got a lot of work to do yet. We've got a lot of myths to debunk. The first myth, that we've done this before, that this is nothing new. That's just not true. High volume hydrofracking is just the last 4 or 5 years that it's come online. Another myth is that, the frac fluid is 99% water and sand. It's nothing to worry about. Well, remember the phrase is high volume. That's 5 million gallons of fluid per fracking event. The conventional drilling is 80,000 gallons, not 5 million. So every fracking event's got 50,000 gallons of carcinogens and endocrine disruptors in it. That's a lot to worry about. Another myth, that recycling is going to take care of the wastewater problem. They're trying this out in Pennsylvania. It's a huge chemistry experiment in Pennsylvania. They don't know how to do the recycling. And the end result of it is just that the frac fluid, the wastewater, is more contaminated, more toxic than it was before. Another myth that we're fighting against is the idea that New York's laws are, we'll be better than other states. We'll have tighter regulations than anybody else. I don't know how many people know that Schimmel County is right now accepting drill cuttings from Pennsylvania Marcellus wells. Well, why would Pennsylvania be exporting drill cuttings to New York? Because the cuttings are radioactive enough that they set off the Geiger counters that are required in Pennsylvania, but they're not required on landfills in New York. So that's why we're getting their drill cuttings. Another myth, and this is probably one of the hardest, is that upstate, we really need the economy. The economy needs that kind of boost. It's going to be a big boon. Well, that's not true when you look at all the costs. 90% of the workers in Pennsylvania come from out of state. And they push out the locals. There's no housing. People can't afford to rent a house or rent an apartment because they've got to fight with the crews coming in from out of state. Here's the Elmira Star-Gazette the other day. The natural gas rush, what happened to our towns? What happened? So inside we read a story, the residents of Burlington long for yesterday. Traffic clogs Towanda. Rents soar on apartments and houses. Oh, here's a good one. One man cashes in on an RV park. That's good. Tavern owners, beer distributors love the new business. Yeah, the bars are really busy. So are the police, so are the EMTs. Tell you what, if New York wants to do something for upstate New York, fix dairy prices so that farmers can make a living on their land without selling it out to the gas companies. But the worst myth, and this is a linchpin, is that gas is a cleaner fuel. It's not. It's only cleaner burning. It's not cleaner when you look at the whole life cycle. And you have to look at the whole life cycle. Methane, that's natural gas. Methane is 72 times more polluting in terms of global warming than carbon dioxide. So when you look at everything, that's the emissions from extraction, from cleaning the wastewater, and from distribution. Gas might be even dirtier than coal. Now they say gas is this bridge to the renewable energy future, right? Wrong. If we flood the market with Marcellus gas, the price goes down, the payback period goes up. You'll never have the economics to switch to renewables. That bridge becomes impossibly long. It's time instead to get away from fossil fuels altogether. Shale gas is the new corn ethanol. That is, it's the solution that makes it, the supposed solution that's going to exacerbate the problem. It is time to do the study on the EPA study on hydrofracking. It's time to let the Cornell scientists who are working on the life cycle problem to do their study, and don't drill before we have the information. We could switch to 100% renewable energies in 20 years if we make that choice. It's time to make that choice. We don't have time to waste pursuing a dinosaur fuel of shale gas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha. Mr. Brian Kavanagh, State Assembly.
Thank you very much, Brian Kavanagh, Assembly Member for the East Side of Manhattan. You know, it's been a long road to get to this point. You know, we started several years ago with the gas industry and the administration in Albany proposing to permit high-volume hydrofracture gas drilling in New York State for the first time. We had a proposal from the DEC to permit that generically throughout the affected areas. We've had public hearings, particularly here at the City Council and in the State Assembly and the State Senate, to consider what should be permitted and what should be not. We've had rallies here. I think a lot of us were here on a very, very cold day. I think it was January 4th. I know this is your second visit to our city for this purpose. Very cold day in January. We had one of the biggest rallies that I've ever seen in Albany to express the concerns people have. And now we're here at the cusp of it's the end of the legislative session, and we have a proposal on the table that will put a moratorium on this practice in this state until we have the answers that we need. And this is an industry now that is trying to claim the status of victim. They're trying to say that people are deceiving you about the dangers of this process. They're trying to say that, people don't understand the benefits of natural gas. Well, what we understand is that this is an industry that is a victim of two things. It's a victim of the destructive practices, the destructive environmental practices that they've done throughout this country in states where they've done high-volume hydrofracture gas drilling. And it's also a victim of its own secrecy. Because the truth is, when they tell you there are no documented cases of people being poisoned by this activity, of the environment being destroyed by this activity, of the flammable water in people's homes as a result of this activity, the reason that they say that has not been proven is that they're not willing to even say what's in the fracturing fluids. They're not willing to even reveal their practices to the regulatory agencies at the state and the federal level that are supposed to be regulating them. And until very recently, their answer to all that was the EPA has looked at this, the EPA has studied it, and the EPA has said that it's okay. Okay, well, now we know that the EPA is no longer saying it's okay. We know the EPA has said there's an urgent need to study this practice, and we in New York State are not going to permit it until we've seen that study, until we've seen the academic experts have had an opportunity to weigh in, and until the concerns that have been expressed in communities across this state have been addressed. And that includes our water supply in New York, but it also includes environmentally sensitive areas everywhere else in the state. It includes the small communities that are going to be destroyed by heavy volume industrial activity, and it certainly includes the long-term health of the water resources of this state. So we're here to say I'm proud to be part of this very broad coalition that is saying we will pass a moratorium now before the end of this legislative session, and we're going to protect ourselves and do what we can at the state level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kavanagh. The next person I'm going to introduce has a court case and has to leave shortly, so will Joel Kupferman please come up? He's head of the New York Environmental Law and Justice Project.
Thank you very much. Joel Kupferman, New York Environmental Law and Justice Project and the National Lawyers Guild Environmental Justice Committee. Not more than 15 minutes ago, I got a call from the people in the Gulf, the Mississippi Independent Lawyers Association, asking for help on all the damage that's going down there. We also represent the people at Crestone, Colorado, that's been fighting the Bureau of Land Management over their water, the quality of water. We disagree so heartily with the oil industry's claim, the gas industry's claim, that there hasn't been problems. We're getting these calls at the Law Project and at the Guild almost every other day from other parts of the country, so we applaud this moratorium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel. Next, New York State Assembly member Michelle Schimmel.
Hello, New York City. I'm from Long Island, and guess what? I took mass transit to be here. Maybe that's part of the equation that we have to think about conservation as well. I have to tell, I'm going to quote the Dalai Lama, I'm going to paraphrase him. He said that you should try and help other people. That's our role in life. But if we can't help everyone, then certainly we shouldn't harm them. If we've learned anything about what's going on in the Gulf, technology doesn't have all the answers. And we can't just say that it's not an issue. It is an issue. We have to not harm anyone. The Engelbright-Addabbo bill does just that. It is a common sense approach. Unfortunately, common sense isn't common sense enough. That's why we have legislation, and that's why I'm here with my legislators from the council, as well as the state assembly and senate, to put some common sense back. I support a moratorium. Actually, I'll put it on record, I'm against hydrofracking. But, all right. But I'm certainly for a moratorium. You can cut that out. But anyway, I'll tell you that you've done a great job, all the advocates in the legislature. A year ago, no one knew what couldn't pronounce hydrofracking. Now, everyone knows what hydrofracking is, and thank you for inviting me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Kate Sinding, who is the Deputy Director of the New York Urban Program of the Natural Resources Defense Council.
Thank you. New York State stands at a critical crossroads. We can go down the path of Pennsylvania and other states that have followed the approach of drilling first and asking questions later. We've seen where that path leads. Contaminated drinking water supplies, fish kills, exploding water wells, and most recently a massive well explosion that spewed toxic gas and chemicals into the air, 75 feet in the air, unabated for 16 hours. Or we can follow a different path. We can stop, we can breathe, and we can ask the questions that have not yet been answered but that need to be answered to let us know, can hydrofracking proceed safely in New York State? And if so, how will that be done? That's why we're here today in strong support of the Engelbright-Addabbo bill. That's a sensible piece of legislation that would impose a short-term moratorium on hydrofracking so that we can get the scientific answers to the many unanswered questions that remain. We need to measure twice and cut once. Too much is at stake: our precious drinking water, our air quality, and the health of our children and future generations. We urge passage of this legislation now, this session. New York needs to stand up and say, if there's one thing that the Gulf has taught us, we need to make sure that these industries are properly evaluated. We can't trust what they tell us when they say it can be done safely without additional regulation. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce my own assembly member from Brooklyn, Jim Brennan.
Thank you so much, Karl. As you can see, citizens from all across New York State and Pennsylvania, different groups, environmental groups, state legislators, local legislators, community groups, are all united around some fundamental principles involving the obvious recognition that hydrofracking technology is extremely dangerous. The New York State government is not proceeding down the path of protecting the people of the state of New York from the consequences of the environmental contamination of hydrofracking. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation last December put out draft environmental regulations with respect to drilling that provide no meaningful restrictions whatsoever on gas drilling using the dangerous hydrofracking technology. We were all shocked and disturbed that the state government is not proceeding down the path of protecting the citizenry. Fortunately, the Environmental Protection Administration announced it was planning to do a study to determine the levels of danger, the levels of environmental contamination, and what to do about this technology. And as a result, everybody here is unified around the Engelbreit-Adabo legislation that would establish a 2-year moratorium on any drilling in New York State while the EPA study is continuing and awaiting the outcome of that study. In the meantime, all kinds of legislation is proceeding into the Rules Committee, passing out of the Environmental Conservation Committee, that limit in one way, shape, or form the ability of the gas industry to use the hydrofracking technology. And I think we all need to work together. The Engelbreit-Adabo bill is a unifying element with respect to every group that's here. And I commend everybody for coming out and trying to protect the water supplies of the people of the state of New York from one of the most dangerous technologies in existence in the world today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Next up, we'd like to have Susan Lerner, Executive Director of Common Cause.
Thanks, Karl. We're here because, as several of the earlier speakers have said, this is a common sense issue. Common Cause, a nonpartisan citizen watchdog, is interested in government accountability and government effectiveness. And the Engelbreit-Adabo bill is an excellent example of the kind of coordination that we need to see more of between the different branches and levels of our government. It makes sense to wait until we have the word from the EPA in order to determine whether it is safe to hydrofrack. So this is a good government issue. Let's take the time to make sure that the science is clear. And let's applaud our legislators for being willing to stand up to the oil industry, which spent over $600,000 lobbying in New York State last year alone. And the records indicate that they are on track to spend even more. So this is good government. This is the kind of coordination that we need. Do the study, have the state wait until the science is clear at the federal level, and take the time, step back, get this right. This is government as it should work. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Next, I would like to introduce a city council member who has been active on this issue for a very long time. Council member Jim Gennaro.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank in a special way everyone who is here today, certainly my colleagues in government from near and from far, who have really put themselves out there, and there's wonderful coalition, and I think everyone should give themselves a round of applause for the history that we've already made. Let me tell you a little about Steve Engelbright. I knew Steve back in Stony Brook in the 1970s when we were both young, skinny, single, didn't have a gray hair between us, and we're both good looking. And now, these many years later, we're just good looking. But we lost all the other things. But you know, time. What can I tell you? Steve was my environmental mentor. He, taught me geology, taught me a couple of things about being an environmentalist, and I've tried to go out and do some good things. And with your help, we have, made history on this issue. When fracking bumped into New York State, that's when all their problems really started, and we have to, continue to press the case. We have had some relief with regard to our own New York City drinking water supply watershed, with the water supply watershed for Syracuse, but that doesn't make up the whole state. There are, drinking water supplies and sensitive areas throughout the state, and it's critically important that before Steve and Joe Dabo came forward with their bill, the EPA stepped in and realized that they had to update their phony baloney study that was released in 2004 that didn't make a lick of sense. And they wouldn't have come to that and taken the plunge to make that study unless the people behind me had done what they all did. And now there's no hiding for EPA now, thanks to what has happened in New York State. So this bill is very, very important, as people have said. It's a very, very common sense piece of legislation, which basically says, let's not act until we know what the hell we're doing. And so you can't get more basic than that, and I think the people of the state need and deserve their government to act with that amount of common sense. That amount of common sense will be put in place by this bill. I thank the state legislature for moving this bill, hopefully this session right now. And I'm very grateful that I no longer have to stand on Union Turnpike outside my office 2 years ago like I did with the Q46 going by with like 2 local reporters who couldn't pronounce hydrofracking. Now it's a national movement. Thanks to all these people. So good work still has to be done. Let's stay in there and get it done. Thank you all for coming, and God bless you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gennaro. In the last several years, a number of films have been made on this issue. The most recent is Gasland, which won a special jury prize at Sundance. Josh Fox is the director. He could not be here today, but his mother is. So I'd like to call up Angela Fox.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say a little bit about the history of Gasland. This was not a movie that was made for television. It was born out of Josh's love for the home and the land, and the home that his father and I built in 1972 ourselves on 22 acres of land in northern Pennsylvania, very close to the Delaware River, on a trout stream that is fed by the Delaware River. He got an offer in his hand for $100,000 to drill on the land. And this was, as it has been said here, when this issue was not known. He took it upon himself to try to inquire as to what was actually going to happen. And as a result, took his car and his camera and went across the United States, 22 states, interviewing many people. And if we're looking for evidence, people are looking for evidence as to the damage that can be done from hydrofracking. This is what we call clinical evidence. It's the anecdotal records of each and every person that he interviewed and filmed and documented exactly what was happening to their health, their land, and their water. Everyone who wants to breathe clean air or drink clean water needs to see this film. It will premiere on June 21st on HBO, and you'll be able to see it subsequently. It'll be in the film in New York City in the fall. Right now he's on tour with the film wherever it can be shown, and basically helping to inform people as to what the issue is. Even though all of us are here, many people do not know about hydrofracking. They do not really believe that what happened in the Gulf can happen here in New York City, can happen in upstate New York. Once the water is polluted, once the land is ruined, we can't get that back. If we look at the Gulf, we could see they cannot get that back. They cannot. They will not be able to. They will not be able to regain the livelihood they had. Those animals and all the ecosystem will be ruined. It will never come back. So no matter what the oil and gas industry is saying, we must learn something from looking at the TV and listening to these guys talk, because clearly they're not telling us the truth when they talk about the safety and they talk about the minimal damage to the environment. Look at the film, and as many people as you can talk to about the film, let them know that this exists and they will learn from it. They will have the evidence that they're looking for. Thank you very much.
I just forgot to thank three people that I really should thank. Sorry to come on again, but three very, very special people that really need to be thanked. I was of course going to thank Josh Fox, but that was already done. Josh is a great guy. He even put me in his movie. Imagine that. But also, yeah, well, shucks. Anyway, Judith Enck, the the EPA Region 2 Administrator, has been a critical force behind trying to get EPA to do the right thing on this. I want to thank in a special way Speaker Quinn of the New York City Council, who put the full resources of this body behind the push to get the state to do the right thing. And Mayor Bloomberg, through his DEP, reached out and got a whole big chunk of money, did a huge body of science, I think, which is going to be used throughout the country when states and localities try to fight fracking. They're going to use the huge body of science that was compiled by the Bloomberg administration. So I wanted to thank the mayor, wanted to thank Judith Enck, wanted to thank Speaker Quinn, and of course Josh Fox. Thank you again.
Thank you. Next up is the representative from the Sierra Club. That's myself. My name is Karl Arnold. I'm a member of the Sierra Club, as well as an upstate group called CDOG, Chenango, Delaware, Otsego Gas Group. It's imperative for Albany to pass the Adabo-Engelbright moratorium on hydrofracking. More time is essential, as many have said today, to assess what this form of drilling would mean for New York. Pete Granis has made it very clear that permitting could start this fall and drilling could start before the end of this year. The oil and gas corporations have made it very clear they'll do anything they think they can get away with to inflate their bottom line. Without a moratorium now, we can expect waste disposal issues of monumental proportions. There's no wastewater plant in New York that can handle hydrofracking muds and fluids with their brew of toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and radioactive substances. Without a moratorium now, we can expect more rig deaths, like the two in Pennsylvania in recent weeks, for which our local first responders have not been equipped or trained. That would be only one of the extra expenses borne by local taxpayers, along with paying for the ruination of rural roads and paying for the extra strain on local schools, local housing, and hospital emergency rooms. Without a moratorium now, we can expect more contaminated drinking water wells, with the usual conspicuous increase in farm animal stillbirths and deformed offspring, and in humans, more respiratory, kidney and liver ailments, cancers, and brain lesions. Without a moratorium now, we can expect conservatively about 65,000 wells drilled across the southern tier. The fresh water confiscated from New York's lakes, streams, and rivers would be astronomical. 65,000 wells would require 325 billion gallons of fresh water, permanently contaminated and permanently removed from the natural water cycle. And that's just for a single fracking. A well might be fracked 10 or more times. 65,000 wells worth of chemicals, averaging about 50,000 gallons per well, would require about 3,250,000,000 gallons of mostly toxic chemicals. for one single fracking. Here's personal testimony that I learned of on June 1st. Quote, "My name is Phyllis. I live in Lake Lynn, Fayette County, Southwest Pennsylvania. I have 4 gas wells behind me and a compression station 300 feet in front of me. My grandchildren are suffering headaches and burning throats. The trees are dying behind me. We call the DEP and EPA and health department doctors. Nothing. They dumped the fracking water in our lakes and creeks here. Someone please help us before it's too late." End quote. Now, Phyllis is one of 80 people in Lake Lynn who've been told they have vitamin D deficiency, problems with the sun. Several people are taken each night to the hospital with the same symptoms: dazed and confused, headaches, nausea, vomiting. They've been poisoned. The southern tier of New York State is a significant food shed for Binghamton, Scranton, Utica, Syracuse, Philadelphia, Buffalo, and New York City. Without a moratorium now, we can expect the poisoning of our water, soil, and air, the underpinnings of all living things. The Sierra Club advocates the rational alternative, a national energy policy that redirects subsidies away from fossil fuel and nuclear to renewable energy and a sustainable economy. Is it rational to trade gas for what sustains us, sustains all of us? Without a moratorium, New York will soon reinvent the wheel. The same wheel that's already left its deep ruts of industrial-scale destruction across more than 30 states. If we don't put on the brakes now, New York State will inflict on itself the equivalent of mountaintop removal. We need this moratorium, and we need it now. Thank you.
Amen.
Next up, Joe LeVine, who's president of NYH2O.
Thank you, Karl. Since Karl mentioned so many statistics, if they drill those 65,000 wells, each well requires a clearing of 5 acres. If you do the math on 5 acres of clearing, you get 250 to 350 million trees that are cut down as a result of this process. And what we're left with is what's termed a sacrificial industrial zone. The amazing thing about this ask here about a moratorium and what the Engelbreit-Adabo bill does is it's really so simple. We're not even saying there's no drilling. We're only saying wait and let the study be done. It's such a simple ask. It's hard to imagine that we're having such a hard time with our legislators, except for this esteemed group here who have been in support of this for a long time. We have to force them to do the right thing. There's a lot of industry money out there, but this is a very simple thing. Let the EPA do their study before anything else takes place here. We have the benefit, unfortunately, of our friends from across the U.S. in 30 other states where this is being done to learn from their experience. But our legislators are pretending that this never happened and we're just starting from zero. We have the evidence, as has been stated. People are getting poisoned. Also in Hickory, in one town, 400 families are without water. And they can't even talk about it because they had to sign non-disclosure agreements with the industry in order to get the water. This is happening all across the U.S. Rural people who can't afford to hire a lawyer to fight Halliburton and the likes have to sign non-disclosure agreements just to get water. The situation is very serious out west. It's moving like a wildfire across Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is stamping permits like you can't believe. If we didn't have legislators like this and city council people in New York, we would already be looking at this activity in our basin here. So everybody has to contact all their legislators and make sure that this bill is passed. This is just the first ask. This bill is only a temporary finger in the dike. It's just a moratorium until the studies are done. There's also more comprehensive legislation that we have to follow after this. Jim Brennan, Assemblymember Jim Brennan, who was just here, has a much more comprehensive bill which the legislature I hope takes up soon as well, which is long-term regulation. We cannot leave this up to Pete Granis and the DEC. They want to drill. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Next, I'd like to welcome Julia Walsh, who is Project Director of Frack Action.
New York City is 1 out of 3 cities in the country with unfiltered, clean drinking water. Here in the largest metropolitan center of the country, it seems that the question of drilling in New York City's watershed is out of the question. Yet it is still as much a reality as when natural gas was first discovered in the ancient rock of the Marcellus Shale. The DEC Mineral Resources Director made a statement in April at the Business Council meeting where he said that they would begin issuing permits at the end of this year. The DEC also that month came out with a statement that it would remove the New York City watershed and the Syracuse watershed out of the DSGEIS. But this was only a temporary move, making no further statement about how the watershed is still open for hydrofracking once the drilling begins in other parts of the state. For an understaffed agency that is meant to protect the environment and steward our natural resources, this statement is irresponsible and disrespectful to the voices of so many here in New York City and across the state who made over 14,000 public comments about the necessity for a thorough and comprehensive impact assessment on the ecosystem and water systems of New York. The fact of the matter is that no one knows how the water in the aquifers underground moves and where these aquifers feed into the groundwater supply of the reservoirs. With a small staff, the DEC is not capable of moving forward without a moratorium utilizing the EPA's scientific research. With only 17 inspectors to oversee hydrofracking operations, along with their other duties, this is no way that the DEC can handle the problems that we can potentially encounter given the accidents of Pennsylvania and other states. With no moratorium, we could not only destroy our water system, but we could potentially destroy the land that grows our food. It is clear that a moratorium on hydrofracking until after the EPA study is complete is absolutely necessary so that we can learn what blasting over 596 chemicals into the ground and water system has had on people, animals, birds, fish, trees, plants, and all life throughout this beautiful country. New York has been a leader for the nation in our past, and let it be again. In light of the disaster in the Gulf, let's be aware of the flaws of an industry that didn't have a solution for the problems it has created, and that throughout this country, with hydrofracking, as people drink water from huge tanks of transported water to their homes, this industry does not have a solution to the problem of contaminating and poisoning the water in communities and cities around this country. Enough is enough. We know that hydrofracking can quickly become New York's own Gulf disaster without proper scientific studies and research. In a city with 8 million residents and a state with the largest reservoir of fresh, clean water, the richest soil, and the most beautiful wilderness, that this issue goes beyond politics. The message is crystal clear. Let us be safe than sorry. I'm here on behalf of my generation and the future generations, that we must stand together united as New York State citizens and support the passage of the Engelbreit-Adabo bill. Please join us on June 15th, this Tuesday at noon, at press events across the state at DEC regional offices in support of this bill, and with the launch of a cutting-edge national website and campaign called Frack Action. Thank you. FrackAction.com.
Thank you, Julia. Next, I'd like to call on Prague Michaels, who is the Watershed Program Director for Riverkeeper.
Well, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here today with all my colleagues and the elected officials, many of whom have been on this issue since day one. And I think there's a connection that's going to start to get made a little bit more as we move forward in this issue, and that is that you can't really talk about the gas industry without talking about the oil industry. There's a reason they call it the oil and gas industry. These are the same, they're similar companies, they have the same trade associations and the same lobbyists, and they have the same mantra, which Kate mentioned earlier, which is drill first and ask questions later. Well, that's not going to happen in New York, and Riverkeeper firmly and strongly supports the Engelbreit-Adabo bill, because as Joe LeVine said earlier, all it does is say, let's slow down and let's get some answers before we proceed head first into it with a dangerous technology. And the oil and gas industry is really fond of talking about all the men and women who it employs, but you don't hear as much about the hardworking men and women whose lives it destroys. You don't hear a lot about the 11 people who died in unimaginable horror aboard the Deepwater Horizon. You don't hear about the workers that were killed and burned this past week in gas explosions in Texas and West Virginia and Pennsylvania. And you really don't hear about the hardworking families who've opened their land to the gas companies in good faith and who have received nothing in return but heartache. We went down to Dimmock, Pennsylvania last week, where I know many people have already been, and we talked to local residents down there whose lives have been permanently altered and permanently affected and permanently impacted because of gas drilling operations. They no longer have clean drinking water. They've had spills on their property. Their children and animals are getting sick. And we're not going to let this happen in New York. And the legislature and the governor and DEC, we just have to be smart about this. There is no rush to get this gas. It's not going anywhere, but we will not have upstate New York turned into an industrialized landscape. It's not going to happen on our watch, and we hope that our elected officials will take action this session and pass this bill and put a stop to the lies that the industry keeps perpetuating. I've had people high up in Chesapeake Gas Company tell me that they have nothing to hide. They're in support of disclosing their chemicals. Well, you know what? That's horseshit. Because just yesterday I saw on a website, on an industry-sponsored website, that they're calling the Frack Act harmful. So this is, they are, if they're not outright liars, they are at best extremely misleading. And, here in New York, we have a chance to do this right. And that might mean not doing it at all. We're just not sure yet. We haven't seen enough, and don't let them tell you that this is a proven technology, that there hasn't been an incident in 60 years. That's a lie. That is false.
It's also horseshit.
It's also horseshit, exactly.
That's right.
So anyway, Jim Gennaro, ladies and gentlemen. So anyway, we're going to be here. We're going to continue to be here. We were here 2 years ago. Well, there was just a few of us and Councilman Gennaro trying to call attention to this issue. And we're going to be here tomorrow. We're going to be here the day after that. We're going to be here next week, next month, next year. We're going to be here on the steps of City Hall. We're going to be in the courthouses. We're going to be in the streets. And we're going to be in the woods if we have to, because we're not going to let them do this to New York State. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And Craig Michaels, who is Watershed Program Director for Riverkeeper. And I want to thank both Craig and Councilmember Jim Gennaro for their enlightened use of technical language. Next is Michael LeBron, who is a board member of Damascus Citizens for Sustainability.
Okay, thank you, and I'm also speaking on behalf of New Yorkers for Sustainable Energy Solutions. We live in an era when easy access to cheap fossil fuels are drawing to a close. The nation confronts a future that asks many difficult questions with regard to meeting its energy needs. Now, to hear how the oil and gas industry tell it, the questions are few, they aren't difficult, the future is now, and it lies underneath the feet of people living above the Marcellus Shale. But our neighbors in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and elsewhere are learning that the questions not asked have led to polluted streams and aquifers that are either costly or impossible to remediate, health risks, a loss of control over quality of life that they once took for granted, declining residential home values, and a series of spectacular blowouts over the last few days, resulting in the deaths of many workers. They have watched almost helplessly as the industry invades and plunders their communities as it would any third world country. This invasion is abetted by lax regulatory policies that are the fruit of an ideological shift that began 30 years ago that has also had unfortunate consequences in other areas of American life. It is time to think about swinging the pendulum back with regard to drilling for natural gas using the newly combined technologies of hydraulic slick water fracturing and horizontal drilling, Washington is now wisely reconsidering the circumstances under which an exemption for this technology was granted to our nation's clean air and water laws, otherwise known as the Halliburton exemption. The EPA has ordered a new study based on real science on the risks that these technologies in their current form pose to water quality, an important capital asset, and to public health. Legislation put forward by Senator Addabbo and Councilperson Engelbright wisely asked for a moratorium on drilling on behalf of New Yorkers throughout the state until this study is complete, so that New York can lead the nation and the world in an effort to get this right. Damascus Citizens supports this reasonable measure. We say not here, not now, not until the difficult questions are asked and answered in ways that assure us that the prosperous New York we all seek will also be a livable New York. Thank you. And I've been asked to read one more statement on behalf of the American Academy of Pediatrics of New York State, representing more than 6,000 pediatricians and the millions of children that care for across the state, who strongly support A10942 and S7592. This legislation provides an opportunity for the EPA to study the potential public health impacts of hydraulic fracturing, and for New York State's leaders to have that information before it makes any decision about permitting hydraulic fracturing in the state. New York State American Academy of Pediatrics membership is concerned about the potential negative impacts on water, air, soil, contamination, increased traffic, and possible spills of contaminated materials in areas where many children and families live. Allowing time for the EPA study will allow our state leaders to move forward on this issue fully informed about whether hydraulic fracturing is a good public policy for our state. We urge the legislature to pass this legislation now, imposing the moratorium, provide the time for our state leaders to have the latest EPA data to inform our decisions as we move forward.
We have Matt Wallach, who is Hudson Valley Program Coordinator for Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Matt?
For Citizens Campaign for the Environment, CC applauds Assemblymember Engelbright, Senator Addabbo, and all their colleagues in calling for a sensible moratorium on the risky fracking for gas in New York State. There is no hydro-fracking rush. From flammable drinking water to methane and fracking fluid filling the Pennsylvania sky, the warning signs are definitely clear. New York must learn from its neighbor. In Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection has already enacted a retroactive moratorium on hydrofracking. New York must take a proactive role based on precaution. Clean and safe drinking water is a public right and a public trust. That is why Congress directed the EPA to examine the full effects and risks between hydrofracking and drinking water. New Yorkers deserve the right to see the results of the study, learn the risks associated with the process, and compare hydrofracking with sustainable means of energy production. Gone are the days when we could trust the oil and gas industry. We demand sound science, sustainable energy production, and the protection of our priceless water resources. More than 20,000 New Yorkers have signed petitions and sent letters to the state legislature in support of adopting a common-sense moratorium on fracking in New York State. The legislature must enact a moratorium on fracking gas now. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. In closing, I've just been told that the noise we've been hearing is a demonstration by students who don't want to lose their free Metro cards. New York City needs to support public transport because that's part of what will be a conservation measure so that we don't need as much fossil fuels as we make the transition to a post-carbon future. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. Thank you for your time and your effort. And the press conference is now closed.